The Africa of our universe, our Somalia, a nation that, since its inception, has been ravaged by famine, instability, and internal strife. Even today, Somalia ranks number 1 in the ranking of failed states. Terrorists run rampant, pirates harass shipping lanes off their coast, and parts of the nation wish to break away. Did it have to be this way? In the world of Kaiserredux, anything is possible. And today, I will show you how Somalia, against all odds and opponents, achieved the truest, purest form of communism, and the god they killed to do so. Following victory in the Weltkrieg, the German Empire had amassed the largest African colony the world had ever seen, the sprawling Middle Africa. While impressive on the map, this colony, headed by Wilhelm Solf, was disunited and unstable, a collection of protectorates just waiting to shatter at the lightest touch. At the northeast corner of this colony lie Djibouti and the port of Berbera, Somalilands that Sultan Mahmud Kali Shire wishes to incorporate into his country, along with the lands of Harar and the rich oil fields of Jubaland. But he can't. Not yet. For food shortages ravage the countryside, and the strongest clan of the land, the Warsangali, have de facto control over all decision-making in the Sultanate. The Sultan was but a puppet in the eyes of the tribe, and this could not be. Destroy the Warsangali and you gain absolute control. That was the Sultan's theory. And could he do it? Perhaps. He had a great start, and by early February, the first of the reforms, the strengthening of the government, had been completed. But soon after, disaster struck. On February 5th, 1936, the German stock market crashed, and what was being called Black Monday reached Somalia. It shall be recorded that this event, while the Sultan was unaware of its consequences, reshaped the political landscape of Somalia. For the Sultan would pull back in his quest to destroy the powerful clans to attempt to alleviate the economic crisis at hand. It would prove futile, as the Sultan's solution was to bring in foreigners to help reform and build Somalia. This angered the starving populace, as they felt that they were being prepared for Italian, or perhaps even German colonialism once again. On November 1st, 1936, a powder keg exploded. Amidst the chaos of the capital, a young general by the name of Siad Barres, leader of the SRSP, consolidated his control over the nation. The Sultan and his family were executed in the early hours of November 2nd. Now that the Totalists were in charge, there was much work to be done. The nation may have had a new name, the nation may have had a new flag, but the nation still retained many problems with the previous government. Not to mention that the Warsangali was furious with the revolution. They believed, rightfully, that Siad Barres would trample on their 7th-century-old tribal authority. They clamored with the surrounding powers, and through their efforts, and the fear of syndicalism spreading further, they achieved funding and weapons from Ethiopia, Egypt, and Kenya-Uganda. The Committee for the Liberation of the Horn from Communism, of the CLHC, had been formed. In response, Siad Barres immediately promoted himself to commander of all military forces, at the time a mere 42,000 men to the tribe's over 100,000, and declared war on the CLHC. The Invisible War had begun. On the 3rd of November, riots broke out across the countryside, and a raid on Las Corre brought the city under anti-communist control. In what had been called the 3-day march, CLHC forces conquered around 50% of the Somali countryside, and by November 6th stood poised to sever the railway that connected the two major Somali cities, Hargeisa and Werder, to the capital of Mogadishu. But Siad Barres was smart. He knew he still held the advantage, as the rebels had only conquered desert and one important city. He knew if he could retake Las Corre, the movement would crumble entirely. While he had fewer men, they were trained, they were well equipped, thanks to the support of syndicalist superpowers, and ferociously loyal to the cause of both socialism and pan-Somali thought, which Siad Barres promised them. On November 10th, a successful counteroffensive gave more breathing room for Mogadishu, while putting the rebels at risk of encirclement. The domestic front saw similar victories as to win the support of the Somali countryside. Massive agricultural reforms were put in place. More land was set up to be farmland, and grain was imported from India, as well as secretly from Ukraine via Yemen, avoiding the embargo. By February 24th, 1937, the front lines, while shifting in Siad's favor, were solidifying. He started to call for political unity across all of Somalia, for all Somalis to unite under him and to fulfill the idea of Pan-Somalia, and perhaps even go further, a united East African Federation. He also introduced revolutionary modernization campaigns that sought to bring Somali society up to scratch with those of the West. Tribal practices were outlawed, a national dress code was instituted, and the language switched to a Latinized version of the Osmania script. Being affiliated with a clan was banned, and when asked, you were to say you were a Muslim first, a socialist second, and a Somali third. Failure to do so would be met with 15 lashes in the best case, and jail time for repeat offenses. The reforms were so successful that the Somali Spartakide team placed first in the May 1937 games. It came to be that Siad Barres took control of all aspects of Somali society, but one. Marxism called for the complete abandonment of religion as a concept. But could he really take the word of Allah from himself and from the people? Was Siad Barres strong enough to kill a god? No. It was an impossible task for the time, considering the ongoing civil war. He decided to ban the Bible, the Torah, but the Quran was allowed to stay. Thus fomented a new form of unity between the Muslims and the totalists, named Islamic socialism. As many formerly hardline anti-socialists started defecting to Siad's ranks, the CLHC leadership grew fearful. They needed a knockout blow to the totalists, and they needed it now. So they mustered their forces together and desperately attacked the thin front line, finally taking the railway on August 15th. The Somali Third Army was trapped in the northern pocket, and fierce fighting broke out. For the next 2 days, the most bloody battles of the war took place, with the CLHC punching more holes in the vital railway line. It looked as if the Third Somali Army was bound to surrender, but the unthinkable happened. Middle Africa, stumbling and stuttering under its own weight, collapsed. It is unknown how many states declared independence on August 19, 1937, but most historians agree it was over 25. For our story, however, you only need to know 3. The AGPNZ, headed by Lionel de Rothschild, a Zionist community founded by the remnants of the British government in Uganda, with dreams of one day returning to the then Ottoman Mandate of Jerusalem. A strange personality cult led by Herr Göring, hell-bent on the destruction and reintegration of Middle Africa under his rule. And the Kenya People's Union, the KPU, a totalist regime ruled by Ozzy Onyango Obama. Siad Barres, recognizing that this could be a potential ally, sent a representative to the capital of Wajir to establish a common understanding over Jubaland and perhaps to establish an alliance. They were not received well. In response, Siad Barres, taking advantage of the fact the Kenyans had no real professional army at the time, marched in and took the whole of Jubaland. At the same time, the Somali Third Army, correctly predicting the German Empire would not respond if they invaded the collapsing colony, marched in and seized Berbera. Immediately, new forces, equipment, food, and munitions flooded into the pocket, and on September 12th, the counter-offensive began. Rapid advances by Siad Barres and the Sixth Army put a stranglehold on the south. A massive push by the Somali Third Army brought the railway back under communist control. And a final push from both the Third Army and socialist partisans finally secured Las Corre. With the pseudo-capital of the revolt taken, the CLHC, demoralized and shattered, capitulated. Remnants of the movement, the most fervent anti-communists, drifted to Djibouti, which had also been practically abandoned by German forces. The old fortresses and trenches built by the Middle African administration were hastily occupied and served as the final bulwark against Siad Barres' government. They valiantly defended the desert sands for months, but militarily it could not avail. On December 5th, the last shot of the Invisible War was fired, and the final tribesmen surrendered. Surrendered to the fate of these men. For the revolution called for the liquidation of all tribes and the equalization of all in Somali society, in order to form the truest, most perfect form of communism. You don't like it? You don't eat. Or you disappear into the super military prison, the Hole. The fate of the tribal leaders was simpler, however. Siad Barres had done it. He had united all Somalis into one nation and secured his total control over the state. His final act of the year was to usher in a new era for Somalia, focusing on science and socialism with Somali characteristics. Siad's scientific socialism had been born.
Is life so dear, or peace so sweet, as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God. I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty, or give me death.
Siad Barres would not have long to recover from his assassination attempt. For mere months after he was shot, his territorial integrity was being challenged down south. The Kenyans demanded the entirety of Jubaland to be returned to them, or else. In light of the end of the Civil War, some Somali officials were wary of saying no to the Kenyans. Those officials were swiftly dealt with. War was declared soon after. The Somali army was 11 divisions strong. The Kenyan army, 9 divisions of inferior weaponry and organization. They were also at war with New Zion, bogging down 2/3 of the Kenyan forces in the harsh jungle warfare of Uganda. Massing his troops on the border, Siad Barres launched a full frontal offensive, flanking and outmaneuvering the few border patrols. The capital of Wajir was in sight, but then disaster struck. Up north, Haile Selassie, King of Kings, God of the Rastafari, and Supreme Leader of Ethiopia smelled weakness on the Somali frontiers. In a complete surprise and undeclared invasion, Ethiopian troops marched across the Somali border, and the great African conflict, the War for the Horn, was on. Immediately, Siad Barres made a decision that would decide him the war. He recognized that the front was too large for his 11 divisions to defend adequately, so he thought of a plan to pull back in order to defend more strategic areas. 2 divisions would be enough to hold back the Kenyans, surrendering Jubaland to them temporarily. The Kenyan delegate attempted to negotiate a separate peace deal with Siad, but they were not received well. The other 9 divisions would hold a very specific and strategically chosen fallback line with the Ethiopians, to create an impenetrable wall. This would mean surrendering Djibouti, and thus access to both the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, but this was a sacrifice Siad Barres and the Somali people were willing to make. Employing tactics of scorched earth, he made the land useless to his enemy. The disruption of supply lines caused by this made the Ethiopian troops disorganized, allowing for the counteroffensive to begin shortly after. Pinning the army at Harar, the Somali 2nd and 5th Divisions made a mad dash across the mountains, in an attempt to cut off the Ethiopian army in Somaliland and also retake Djibouti. They were stopped by a militia that had formed. Reinforcing from the south, they took the province in the late hours of August 8th. Djibouti was liberated on August 13th, securing the encirclement. Feeling confident, Siad Barres felt comfortable to declare his nation to be the East African Federation from now on. This gave him claims on the entirety of Ethiopia and Kenya, enraging and frightening the two nations. But because the monarchist regime in Ethiopia and the totalist regime in Kenya refused to even acknowledge each other, Siad was able to divide and conquer. A push along the coast to cut off Ethiopia from international support was next. As Somali boots walked into Dongola, they were greeted as liberators by the local Eritrean population. Aksum and Asmara fell next. The fall of Asa would leave the road to Addis Ababa open, and Haile Selassie was preemptively evacuated to the city of Gondar. The capital of Ethiopia fell on October 25th, 1938. In November, Gondar would also have its militia defense be crushed, and with its capture, the Ethiopian Empire capitulated. Siad Barres had done the impossible. He had successfully defended all of his borders at once, and had come out on top over the false god. He needed to celebrate. In the city of Gondar, a massive military parade was held, followed by the main event, where 18,000 people watched the live show trial of Haile Selassie, where he was charged with, among others, conspiracy against the Somali state, genocide, conspiracy to genocide, anti-revolutionary activities, and aggressive warfare. He was then executed, mere minutes after his sentencing, by Siad Barres himself, to thunderous applause. Siad Barres had killed a god.
وددي عديد عقد صارتي وعرابيو عمري جريو عمري جريو عينك